Welcome to Through a Glass Darkly Radio. You're listening to us on United Public Radio, and the intro song was Mark of the Doomslayer by Karl Casey at Wipeout Audio. Okay, it's been a while since I've had a live show. This is about 2 weeks, something like that. Again, just a reminder, if after you watch this podcast, you enjoy it and you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Also, if you are subscribed, YouTube likes to delete my subscribers for whatever reason, glitch, algorithm, I don't know. But if you enjoy this show and think you are subscribed, just double check. And if you're not, because YouTube unsubscribed you, please resubscribe. Okay, now that that's out of the way, this session, near-death experience, I generated using help of AI. Just want people to know that. Everything else I do in terms of content does not use AI. This is the only content I generate that does, in terms of script writing, etc. So, with that being said, let's get started, because I might not actually be able to get through all the material I have this time. There's a lot of stuff. How you doing, Bucko Pete? All right, let me just mark my place and let us get started. So, near-death experiences are profound personal experiences reported by people who come close to death or are clinically dead for a time and then revived. Rather than a singular phenomenon, NDEs encompass a spectrum of intense experiential events, often described as more real than real, that leave a lasting impact on the person's life and beliefs. These accounts typically include vivid perceptions and emotions. For example, a sense of leaving one's body, traveling through a darkness or tunnel toward light, encountering otherworldly beings, undergoing a panoramic life review, and ultimately returning to life with a transformed perspective. Importantly, while scientific theories exist to explain NDEs in terms of brain physiology, this report emphasizes the experiential side, what people felt, saw, and remembered, rather than reductive medical or neurological analysis. The focus is on firsthand narratives, thematic patterns, and spiritual implications, treating these experiences as subjectively real events in the lives of those who report them. So this podcast is organized into 4 major segments. First, we'll outline the most commonly experienced stages of NDEs, providing a structural overview of hallmark features such as out-of-body experiences, the tunnel and light phenomenon, meetings with beings, life reviews, and the return to the body. Next, we present in-depth case studies and personal narratives spanning historical reports, modern clinical cases, and accounts from diverse cultural or religious backgrounds to illustrate the richness and consistency as well as variety of NDEs across time and cultures. Following that, we explore deathbed visions, the often reported visions of the dying, examining what they are, how they relate to or differ from NDEs, and some notable documented examples. Finally, we'll delve into the concept of life between lives, surveying descriptions of an interim spiritual existence between incarnations as reported by regression therapy subjects, by spiritual traditions, or occasionally by near-death experiencers who glimpse memories of a pre-birth state. Throughout, the aim is to provide clarity, depth, and an immersive sense of these phenomena through the eyes of experiencers, avoiding dry analysis in favor of experiential richness and narrative detail. All claims are supported with citations from credible sources, and images or direct quotations are included where they can enhance understanding. All right, so let's talk about common stages of a near-death experience. Research over decades has shown that despite each NDE being unique, there is a common progression of stages or elements that many experiencers report. Classic studies, beginning with Dr. Raymond Moody's 1975 work and later investigations by organizations like IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies, have identified recurring features that form a loose sequence. Not every NDE includes all these stages, and the order can vary, but typical pleasurable NDE often unfolds in recognizably similar ways. Below, we detail the most commonly reported phases of an NDE, along with descriptions and examples. So we'll start with an intense emotional tone. An NDE usually begins with overwhelming feelings. Most experiencers, especially in pleasant NDEs, I guess that's in relation to, as opposed to unpleasant NDEs, describe profound peace, love, and painlessness, often combined with euphoria or awe. A minority have distressing NDEs, which start with fear, panic, or a sense of despair. In either case, the emotional intensity is striking, far beyond normal life experience, and this mood sets the stage for what follows. Many describe a feeling of total serenity and security once the process begins. For instance, a person badly injured in an accident might suddenly feel all pain vanish and be enveloped in a deep sense of calm and safety, as if removed from the trauma of the body. This emotional shift often coincides with the next stage, the perception of leaving the physical body. Then there's out of body experience, separation from the body. One of the first and most common NDE stages is the sense of leaving one's physical body and viewing it from an outside perspective. Experiencers frequently report that at the moment of clinical death or extreme trauma, they felt themselves float or rise up, often finding themselves above their body, looking down upon the scene. This is the classic out-of-body experience, or OBE. In many NDEs, the person sees their own lifeless or unconscious body below, sometimes witnessing frantic resuscitation efforts or hearing conversations of medical staff, even when the person is comatose or under anesthesia. NDEers often emphasize the crystal clarity of perception in this state. Vision and hearing seem sharper than normal, and they feel a strange detachment, observing without pain or fear. For example, during her famous 1991 NDE, Pam Reynolds, who was undergoing brain surgery, felt herself float above the operating table. She later described seeing the surgeons working on her body and noticing specific details. The tool in use, quote, looked like an electric toothbrush, end quote. And in that case, she accurately described the bone saw device. And she heard a female staff member comment on her aneurysm, even though her ears were plugged with monitors at that time. Pam said she felt more aware than normal in this disembodied state. Similarly, another patient, Maria, who flatlined in a Seattle hospital, reported hovering near the ceiling and watching her resuscitation. She could later describe who was in the room, where they stood, and what they did, down to noticing a pile of paper printouts on the floor from a heart monitor. The details were verified by hospital staff. Such veridical observations, accurately perceiving real events while seemingly unconscious, are among the most intriguing aspects of OBEs in NDEs, and numerous cases like Maria's, quote, shoe on the ledge, end quote, account have been documented. In that case, Maria's consciousness not only watched the ER from above, but then drifted outside the hospital building. She later described seeing a single tennis shoe on a third-floor window ledge in detail, a scuffed dark blue shoe with its lace stuck under the heel, and begged the staff to verify it. To their amazement, a social worker went up and found the shoe exactly as Maria had said, somewhere Maria's physical eyes could not have seen. Such reports suggest that the OBE can involve real perception beyond the body, though how this occurs remains mysterious. Experiencers typically feel little attachment to their body during the OBE. Many remark that they recognize the person on the bed or ground as quote-unquote me, yet they felt oddly unconcerned or even indifferent about it. The dead or dying body is sometimes described as like an empty shell or a suit of clothes that they have temporarily shed. Consciousness feels free, light, and unencumbered by physical limits, sometimes even capable of moving instantly from place to place just by thought. Some NDEers recount exploring the hospital or accident scene from this out-of-body vantage point. Others may linger, or others may not linger at all. The environment might shift quickly to a new setting as the experience progresses. In either case, the separation from the body is usually the gateway to the next phase, traveling to an otherworldly realm. Excuse me. Passing through darkness or a tunnel. After leaving the body, many near-death experiencers report a sense of movement through darkness, often described as going through a void or more commonly as speeding through a tunnel. This tunnel experience has become one of the iconic hallmarks of NDEs. People say they felt pulled or propelled at high speed through a dark space, sometimes with a distant light visible at the end of the passage. The sensation can be one of rushing or flying. Occasionally, a whooshing sound or wind is heard as they accelerate toward the light. In Dr. PMH Atwater's description, quote, passing through a dark tunnel or some other kind of darkness, often accompanied by a feeling of movement or acceleration. Wind may be heard or felt, end quote. NDEers often note that they still feel themselves moving upward or forward, but without a body, as if their point of consciousness is zooming ahead. The darkness is not always described as a tunnel per se. Some experiencers say it was a vast empty space or void. Yet the majority who recall this stage do experience it as a passageway with light ahead, suggesting a transition from the earthly realm to another dimension. The light at the end of the tunnel is typically described as brilliant and inviting, not harsh. In fact, even before reaching it, many people report that the darkness begins to give way to a glow, and they feel drawn toward it by an unseen force or simply by their own desire. The late Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a pioneer in near-death studies, once wrote that patients commonly spoke of, quote, a tunnel, a passageway, an open doorway, end quote, through which they traveled to, quote, the light, end quote. It's noteworthy that not every culture emphasizes the tunnel. Some research suggests tunnel experiences are more frequently reported in Western NDEs than in other cultural contexts. For example, one study found that in India, NDEs more often described going to a different place or realm directly, rather than moving through a tunnel. Nonetheless, the core motif is consistent: transition through darkness into light. During this transition, fear usually subsides, if it was present at all, and positive feelings intensify. As one survivor put it, quote, I was in a dark space racing toward a pinprick of light. Instead of fear, I felt curiously safe, like I was heading home, end quote. The end of the tunnel marks the entry into the next stage, the encounter with the light and often with other beings. Encountering a light and beings of the other side. Emerging from the tunnel or darkness, NDEers frequently find themselves in a realm of light, or at least in the presence of an intense, brilliant light. Many describe this light as unlike anything on earth. Quote, brighter than the sun, but not hurting my eyes, end quote, and often imbued with a personality or intelligence. It is commonly perceived as a being of light, radiating unconditional love and warmth. Experiencers feel completely enveloped by love in this light. In religious interpretations, people may identify the light as God or Christ or another divine figure according to their faith. But even non-religious persons often sense someone present in the light, a being that communicates with them, usually telepathically, conveying love, comfort, or messages. Along with or instead of an amorphous light, NDE accounts almost always include encounters with other beings. These can be deceased loved ones, family, or friends who have died before, spiritual or religious figures such as angels, Jesus, saints, Buddha, etc., depending on one's background, or sometimes unknown luminous beings who nonetheless feel familiar or authoritative. Communication with these entities is typically described as mind-to-mind or telepathic. Words may not be spoken aloud, but thoughts and feelings are directly exchanged and understood. A common element is the incredible sense of recognition and reunion when meeting these souls or figures. For example, a woman who nearly died in childbirth saw her long departed father appear and welcome her with joy. Quote, oh, he is so glad I am coming. He is so glad, end quote, she exclaimed, according to the doctor present. In another case from Sir William Barrett's collection of deathbed visions, a dying woman suddenly looked around a corner of the room, smiling radiantly, and said, quote, "Why, there is Vida," end quote, referring to her sister, whose recent death had been intentionally kept secret from her, making the vision dramatically evidential. The appearance of deceased relatives is extremely common in both NDEs and deathbed experiences. Often these relatives or beings seem there to greet and guide the person. NDEers describe scenes of being embraced by loved ones or escorted by friendly figures through a beautiful landscape. The environment at this stage is often depicted as, quote, "somewhere else," end quote, a distinct realm or world that feels real and often resembles a glorified earth. Some report arriving in a landscape of incredible beauty, gardens, meadows, a city of light, a temple, or simply a realm of glowing mist. As one account described it, quote, "I found myself in a place of brilliant light. There were colors more vivid than any on earth, and I felt an overwhelming sense of being home," end quote. Others mention structures like a bridge or a border they sensed they were crossing. The sense of place can vary. For some, it's clearly a heavenly world with other souls around. For others, it might be more abstract, like a sphere of light or a boundless horizon. But nearly all emphasize the feelings of peace, love, and acceptance emanating from the surroundings and beings. Notably, cultural and religious background influences the forms encountered to a degree. A Christian might interpret the loving light as Christ or an angel. A Hindu could perceive the messenger as Yamaraj, or the Lord of Death, or his assistants. An atheist may just sense an intensely wise presence. For instance, research in India by Dr. Satwant Parisha found many Indian NDEers met Yamdoots, or death messengers, who took them to a cosmic bureaucracy to check ledgers, a scenario reflecting Hindu afterlife beliefs. In one Indian case, a boy was taken by two Yamdoots to a dark, fearsome figure, identified later as Yama, Lord of the Dead, who angrily said they'd fetched the wrong Yasudev, or wrong person. The experiencer was a student, whereas the summons was for an elderly gardener with the same name. The boy was then returned to life, and remarkably, it turned out the correct Vasudev, the gardener, died the very next day. By contrast, Western NDEs often involve seeing relatives or angels rather than a bureaucratic clerk, and settings may be pastoral or ethereal rather than administrative. In one striking close cultural observation, Papua New Guinea tribal NDEs sometimes portray paradise as a kind of modern city with factories, cars, and highways, fulfilling their cultural vision of, quote unquote, the good place. Whereas Americans and Europeans describe, quote, soft breezes, angelic music, flowers, blue skies, and radiant sunlight, end quote, in their heavenly realms. Despite these surface differences, the functional core is similar. The experiencer is in a realm beyond the physical, encountering guiding beings and overwhelming love. During this stage, communication from the beings or the light often conveys important messages or knowledge. Some common themes include, "It's not your time, you must go back," or conversely, "Welcome, we are here to help you," depending on whether the person is going to return or not. Many NDEers report receiving insights or even a flood of knowledge about life, the universe, and spiritual matters, information that sometimes is hard to translate after return. One element that frequently occurs at this juncture is the life review, which may be facilitated by these beings or simply happen in the presence of the light. All right, so the panoramic life review. Perhaps one of the most impactful components of an NDE is the life review, a sudden, vivid replay of the major events or entirety of one's life. Near-death experiencers often describe it as seeing their life flash before my eyes, not in a vague sense, but in a detailed panoramic way that can feel like reliving every moment. The life review is typically 360 degrees and instantaneous or extremely rapid, yet filled with meaning. People have reported seeing every event, every relationship, and every action they ever did, sometimes in a holographic panorama around them. In many cases, it's not just a neutral rewatching. The person experiences the emotional impact on others of their actions. This means they feel what others felt because of things they did or said in life. For example, if they had hurt someone during the review, they might feel that person's pain as if it were their own, an intensely enlightening and sometimes humbling experience. Likewise, kindnesses they perform, they feel the gratitude or comfort those acts gave others. One NDEer described it. It wasn't so much watching a movement of my own life, it was reliving the feelings. I became the people I'd interacted with and felt exactly what I had made them feel. I felt the joy I'd given and the hurt I'd caused. This empathetic reliving is a common feature. The life review can take different forms. Some report it as if scenes unfolding in a panorama or on a screen, with incredible speed yet clarity. Others say they found themselves literally back in each moment, hovering over my shoulder during childhood, adolescence, etc. Time in the NDE is highly subjective. People often say the review felt like it lasted seconds and years at the same time. Indeed, time and space lose their normal meaning. A person can review decades of life in what seems like no time at all. Or conversely, they might experience it with such richness that it feels lengthy. One study of 88 NDEers with life reviews found that many categorized the review as not of events so much as of feelings and lessons, often guided by a higher presence. NDEers generally report that no one else judges them during the review. They judge themselves. The process is a natural moral insight. As you witness and feel the ripple effects of your life, you inherently understand what was loving or unloving. As one experiencer put it, I was not judged by a being. I was simply shown my life, and in the light of complete love, I evaluated myself. The only standard was, how much did I love others? Many note that the beings of light or guide was compassionate and supportive during the review, not condemning. The purpose seemed educational, not punitive. Some life reviews are comprehensive, covering early childhood to the moments before the NDE, while others focus on key highlights or even a single profound lesson. Tricia Barker, an NDE survivor, recounted that her life review zeroed in on specific interactions where she had judged people superficially. She was made to see into their hearts and realize the greater spiritual beauty she had missed. This taught her to be less judgmental and more loving going forward. This illustrates how life reviews often illuminate the importance of love, kindness, and spiritual values over material concerns, a message that NDEers frequently bring back. Indeed, after their NDE, many people say they emerged with a transformational outlook, prioritizing compassion and relationships, losing fear of death, and finding renewed purpose. It's worth noting that not every NDE includes a life review. Estimates vary, perhaps 20 to 30% include it. And distressing NDEs rarely have a positive life review. Some have a hellish review of one's failings or none at all. But when it does occur, the life review is typically one of the most memorable and soul-changing aspects of the NDE. Experiencers often express amazement at the total recall they had. Even memories long forgotten or trivial appeared in detail. The review can also sometimes extend beyond the person's own lifespan. A few NDEers claim they saw scenes of inner life or future. For instance, glimpses of their possible future path if they returned, or even events that later came to pass. This blurs into the next topic of life between lives, which we address later. Generally, after the life review phase, the NDE is approaching a critical juncture, the point of decision or return. The decision to return or being sent back. As the NDE progresses, there comes a point at which the experiencer realizes, either by their own intuition or by being told, that they must return to their body and resume life. Often, this stage is accompanied by strong ambivalence or reluctance. The transcendent realm of love and light is so compelling that many NDEers do not want to leave it. They commonly protest that they want to stay, yet something or someone indicates that their time isn't over. For instance, one person said, "I was in the most beautiful place, surrounded by loved ones. When I learned I had to go back to my body, I felt disappointed and even angry, like a child being sent away from home." This sentiment is echoed in many reports. NDEers experience grief or frustration at being revived. because compared to the bliss and freedom of the other side, waking up in a broken body feels harsh. The circumstances of the return vary. In some NDEs, the person is gently told by an entity, you must go back, you have a purpose to fulfill, or your work on earth is not finished. In others, they are given a choice. For example, a being may ask, do you want to stay here or go back? And sometimes the person thinks of their loved ones on earth, children, spouses, etc., and chooses to return for their own sake, or for their sake. One dramatic case is Dr. Mary Neal, who drowned in a kayaking accident. She described being in a heavenly realm, yet becoming aware of her young son back home and a sense that she needed to return to raise him. She was then told by spirits that indeed she had to go back, and moments later she found herself coughing back to life in her own body. In other accounts, the NDEer is not given a choice at all. They might be sent back or even pushed. Pam Reynolds, for example, said her deceased uncle escorted her spirit back to her body and pushed her in, describing the reentry as feeling like plunging into ice water. Several others similarly report a sudden snapback into the body, often at the moment a defibrillator shocks them or CPR succeeds. Many NDE narratives involve reaching a boundary or threshold, a point of no return. It could be a literal boundary, a gate, a river, a fence, a line of light, or an implicit point. The person knows that if they go further, they will truly die and not return. Often the loved one or guide with them will stop them at this boundary and convey that going forward means permanent transition. For example, an NDEer might walk with a radiant being toward a brilliant city, but a certain archway the being halts and says, you cannot pass through or you won't be able to go back. These boundary moments are pivotal. Many experiencers describe making the agonizing decision to leave the heavenly realm at this juncture, sometimes for the sake of others. For example, I know my children still need me, or because they are told it's God's will. In one case, a man's deceased wife appeared across a river and told him lovingly but firmly to go back and live, indicating it wasn't his time. When the return happens, it is often instantaneous. The person's next memory is of gasping awake in the hospital or feeling pain flooding back into their body. Reunion of soul and body is sometimes described as a jolt or a sudden heaviness. A number of NDEers mention how cold or crude the physical world felt in contrast. I re-entered with a slam. My body was so heavy and dense. I was in pain, and I just cried because I wasn't in that light anymore. Nurses and doctors have indeed reported patients coming back from cardiac arrest who immediately wept or pleaded, "Why did you bring me back?" indicating they retain memory of a peaceful other state. The initial disappointment at revival is so common that NDE researcher PMH Atwater listed disappointment at being revived as a hallmark of pleasurable NDEs. Of course, not everyone is upset to live. Some do express joy at returning with loved ones here, but a significant portion describe a sense of longing for the beauty they left behind. Finally, after the NDE, as the person recovers, they often find their attitudes toward life profoundly altered. While technically beyond the stages of the NDE itself, it's worth noting here that many experiencers integrate what happened by embracing new values. Nearly all lose their fear of death, believing it is not the end. They frequently speak of having a renewed sense of purpose or mission, especially if they were told or shown something about their work yet to do. For example, one woman who attempted suicide and had an NDE where she was told her life's tasks were not done, came back with a drive to help others and a certainty that her life had meaning. Personality changes such as increased compassion, spirituality, and decreased materialism are commonly reported after effects. In short, crossing into that other world and returning leaves many NDEers with the conviction that life continues beyond death and that love is the most important thing in the universe. Lessons impressed on them during the journey through these classic stages of the near-death experience. All right, let's now talk about some case studies and personal narratives of NDEs. Having described the general stages of NDEs, we now turn to specific cases and narratives that illustrate these elements in depth. NDEs have been reported across different eras and cultures, providing a rich tapestry of stories that are once personal and intriguingly often consistent with one another. In this session, we present a range of accounts from historical records and literature, some of the earliest known NDE-like experiences, to well-documented modern cases, from medical settings to anecdotal but influential personal stories. We also compare cross-cultural variations by including accounts from non-Western contexts, demonstrating how cultural background can shape the imagery of an NDE without altering its essential transformative character. Historical accounts of near-death experiences. References to experiences resembling modern NDEs can be found in surprisingly early sources. One of the oldest recorded accounts of a journey beyond death is Plato's myth of dating to the 4th century BCE. In Book 10 of the Republic, Plato recounts the story of a soldier who was killed in battle only to revive 12 days later on his funeral pyre, and who told of an otherworldly journey. Reported that his soul traveled to a mysterious realm where judges sent the virtuous upward to the sky and the wicked down into the earth. He observed souls returning from heavenly and hellish places, recounting joyously beautiful sights or horrific suffering as their respective post-mortem fates. Importantly, witnessed a grand process of reincarnation, souls gathering in a meadow, then choosing new lives from a lottery of fates, guided by supernatural beings. They then drank from the river of forgetfulness and were sent back to be reborn, while himself was instructed to return to his body and report what he saw. The myth of contains many features echoed by modern NDEs. An out-of-body perspective, soul left his body and observed cosmic realms. Judgment or life review, the sorting of souls and tenfold penalties for evil deeds. Encounters with otherworldly beings and the concept of being sent back with a mission to tell others. While couched in mythological language, tale is often cited as the oldest known NDE account, showing that the fascination with afterlife journeys is ancient. Moving forward to medieval times, another remarkably early NDE is recorded by the Venerable Bede in the 8th century. Bede's ecclesiastical history tells of an Anglo-Saxon man, sometimes identified as Dry Thumb, who fell deathly ill one night, was presumed dead, and then suddenly revived the next morning. Upon recovery, Dry Thumb described how his soul had been led by a figure in white through various otherworldly realms, including a place of darkness and terror, sometimes interpreted as hell or a purgatorial realm, where demonic creatures tried to attack him, until a bright figure rescued him. He was then shown a beautiful realm of light, a heaven, but was not allowed to stay and was told to return to his body to live more piously. Bede noted that Dry Thumb indeed changed his life completely after this, becoming almost ascetic in his devotions. This story carries classic NDE motifs: a guided tour of afterlife realms, both hellish and heavenly, a protective being of light, and a message to reform one's life back on earth. It also highlights that distressing or hellish NDEs have been part of the record. Dry Thumb's journey included frightening parts before the salvation, akin to some modern NDEs where a void or hellish scene turns into a positive experience. In the 18th century, we have the case of George de Benneville, a physician and minister who in 1741 published an autobiographical account of a near-death vision. De Benneville, gravely ill and apparently dead for over 30 hours, later described awakening from that state with memories of a transcendental experience. He recounted visiting heavenly realms of exquisite beauty and conversing with celestial beings who imparted spiritual knowledge, reinforcing his universalist belief in God's love for all souls. What makes de Benneville's NDE notable is not only its rich detail and concordance with modern reports, for instance, encountering a bright, radiant throne of the divine and feeling extreme reluctance to leave the heavenly hosts, but also the fact that he was highly respected in his community. His account helps show that NDEs could happen to critical individuals and had profound after effects on their theology and life's mission. Indeed, after recovering, George de Benville devoted himself to preaching love and universal salvation, consistent with the insights from his NDE. By the 19th century, near-death experiences were still not a known scientific term, but documented instances became more frequent in literature and medical anecdotes. A famous early researcher was Dr. Albert Heim, a Swiss geologist who didn't clinically die but had an NDE-like state during a mountaineering accident in 1871. Heim fell off a mountain and while plunging experienced a remarkable phenomenon. Time slowed drastically. His thinking sped up, and he saw a rapid but clear panoramic view of his entire life, all accompanied by feelings of peace and even bliss. In his recollection, my whole past life was displayed in numerous images as though on a stage. Everything was transfigured by a heavenly light, without pain, without distress. He felt no fear. Instead, a divine calm swept through my soul as he fell. Heim survived with injuries and later began collecting similar reports from others who had near-death falls. In 1892, he published his findings, concluding that a common set of mental experiences occur at the moment one faces death, especially in falls. A sense of calm, detachment, a hundredfold acceleration of thought, a panoramic life review, and often visions of a beautiful, peaceful realm or heavenly scenes. Just one thing to add, many years ago, when I pancaked my Humvee, I was like standing outside of the Humvee, outside the hatch with holding my 50 cal. When it started to roll, it felt like I had all the time in the world to drop into the Humvee and survive. Like time definitely slowed for me. So there's definitely something to this. Hein's work is possibly the first systematic study of NDE-like phenomena. His summary reads like a checklist of NDE features: no anxiety, no pain, rather calm seriousness, and a sense of surety. Time greatly expanded, a sudden review of the entire past, often beautiful music, and a superbly blue heaven with roseate cloudlets, then unconsciousness and impact. The consistency of these 19th century reports with later NDE research is striking, underscoring that NDEs are not a new modern invention, but part of human experience across eras. In summary, historical cases from era in antiquity through medieval examples like Drythum to early modern accounts like de Benville and Heim's compilations all illustrate core NDE motifs: separation from the body, otherworldly journeys, encounters with spiritual beings or places, life reviews, and being sent back with lessons. They also show the lasting transformative impact. Individuals often drastically change their lives after these encounters, whether that meant adopting more virtuous living, spreading spiritual messages, or simply losing their fear of death. This continuity over time provides a fascinating context for examining NDEs in the present day. Modern NDE case studies in clinical settings. The latter half of the 20th century and into the 21st century have seen an explosion of reported NDEs, partly due to advances in resuscitation medicine, i.e., more people are brought back from clinical death, and greater willingness to discuss these experiences. Researchers have documented thousands of cases. Here, we highlight a few well-documented modern NDEs that are frequently cited in the literature for their evidential value or depth of detail. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but there's the case of Pam Reynolds in 1991. Pam Reynolds' near-death experience is one of the most famous in NDE research, notable for occurring under highly controlled medical conditions. Reynolds was a 35-year-old woman undergoing a delicate brain surgery for a giant aneurysm. The procedure was a standstill operation, required her body temperature to be lowered to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Her heart and breathing stopped, her brain waves flatlined to zero, and blood drained from her head, effectively inducing clinical death for over an hour. Her eyes were taped shut, and clicking devices in her ears ensured no hearing to monitor brainstem reflexes. In short, by all conventional understanding, consciousness should have been impossible. Yet, during this period, Pam underwent a classic NDE that she later vividly reported. She felt pulled out by a musical tone, a natural D note, and floated above the operating table. From that vantage point, she accurately observed details of the surgical process, describing the specialized saw used on her skull, which she noted resembled an electric toothbrush, and recounting a conversation between the surgeons about the difficulty of accessing her blood vessels. These observations were later confirmed to match reality, even though by medical measures she was deeply under anesthesia with no brain activity. Partway through, Pam became aware of a bright light and felt herself tunnel toward it. On the other side, she had encountered deceased relatives, specifically her grandmother and her uncle, as well as figures standing in the light. She felt indescribable love and wanted to stay with them. However, Pam was reminded that she needed to return. In her account, her uncle led her back and told her it was like jumping into ice water to re-enter her body. She awoke from surgery with clear memories of this experience. The Pam Reynolds case is frequently cited by NDE proponents as compelling evidence that the mind can function independent of the brain, since her detailed perceptions occurred while her brain was clinically inactive. At the very least, it provides a dramatic modern narrative containing all the hallmarks. Verified OBE observations, the tunnel, the being of light and relatives' intense reluctance to return, and the transformational after effects. Pam's experiences deepened her spiritual beliefs about an afterlife. Then there's the case of Maria's shoe in 1977. Another classic case illustrating the veridical perception during NDE is that of a migrant worker known as Maria, treated in Seattle. After suffering a heart attack, Maria was resuscitated and later described to hospital social worker Kimberly Clark Sharp, an astounding experience. She recounted how she rose out of her body and observed the ER room from above, accurately naming the people present and describing specific actions during the code, information she had no normal way of knowing. Then, she said, her attention drifted outside the hospital. She remembered spotting a single tennis shoe on a high external window ledge of the hospital. It was dark blue, left-footed, with a worn patch over the little toe, and the shoelace tucked under the heel. Maria begged the staff to check that ledge. Somewhat skeptical but curious, Miss Sharp went floor by floor until she found on a third-floor ledge a shoe exactly as Maria had described in minute detail. The location of the shoe was completely out of view from any normal vantage, i.e., it could not be seen from ground level, and certainly Maria had never been near that window, leaving conventional explanations lacking. This case has been documented in literature as a strong example of an NDE-OBE veridical perception, the so-called shoe on the ledge, verifying that Maria's consciousness seemingly was able to travel and observe distant locations while her body lay unconscious. Along with Pam Reynolds, Maria's story is often highlighted in discussions about the reality of the NDE out-of-body state. And then there's Dr. Eben Alexander's NDE case in 2008. And for folks who watch this channel, I've interviewed Dr. Eben Alexander. So, just go check the playlist on my channel. You'll find him. In a modern context, few accounts have generated as much public interest as that of Dr. Eben Alexander, an academic neurosurgeon who was once skeptical of NDEs until he had his own. In 2008, Alexander contracted a sudden severe brain infection of E. coli meningitis that left him in a deep coma with neocortical shutdown for a week. During that time, by medical measures, his brain's higher functions were gravely compromised. Yet he awakened reporting one of the most elaborate and transcendent NDEs on record, which he later detailed in the bestseller Proof of Heaven. He described initially finding himself in a dark, muddy realm, which could be likened to a murky underworld, but then being rescued by a bright being of light and taken to an ultra-real, beautiful realm he called the core. In this heavenly place, he experienced God's overwhelming love and heard celestial music. He was also guided by a young woman whom he felt an emotional bond with. Much later, Alexander learned that this being's face matched that of a biological sister he had never met. He was adopted and didn't know of her before, which he took as astonishing personal validation of his experience. Throughout his NDE, he received teachings about the nature of consciousness and the universe, though he struggled to put them into words. Like many others, he encountered a limit, in his case, a huge orb of light that he sensed was the divine source, and understood he had to return. His NDE is notable both because of the severe brain impairment context, which, from his perspective as a neurosurgeon, made it hard to dismiss as a hallucination, and because of its richly spiritual content that transformed a skeptic into a believer in the afterlife. Dr. Alexander's case underscores how even those well versed in science can be deeply changed by an NDE. Critics have debated his medical facts, but Alexander stands by his account and it remains influential in NDE circles. Then there's the 2006 case of Anita Morjani. A case with a dramatic healing aspect is that of Anita Morjani, a woman who in 2006 was dying of end-stage lymphoma. She lapsed into a coma with widespread organ failure. By all signs, she was hours from death. In that state, Anita experienced an NDE where she felt herself expand beyond her body and enter a state of pure consciousness and unity. She reported encountering the essence of her father, who had died, and other loving presences, and she understood profound truths about why her illness had come and how fear had affected her life. She was given a choice to return and was told if she chose life, her body would heal because she now knew her true worth and power. Anita chose to return, and in fact, to the astonishment of her doctors, she woke from the coma and rapidly recovered. Within weeks, her tumors shrank and eventually disappeared. A virtually unprecedented recovery in that scenario. Anita Morjani later wrote Dying to Be Me, attributing her miraculous healing to the spiritual transformation and unconditional love she experienced in the NDE. While skeptics might seek physiological explanations, her story is often presented as an example of the mind-body connection and how NDE insights can sometimes correlate with spontaneous healing. At the least, it's a modern narrative showing the classic pattern: out of body, meeting deceased loved ones, message of purpose, decision to return, followed by life-changing results. In her case, returning with a message about living fearlessly and authentically. Many other modern cases could be detailed. For example, Mellon Thomas Benedict in 1983, who had an NDE with a cosmic tour and returned to his cancer-ridden body, which then unexpectedly healed. Or Colton Burpo, the young boy in 2003 who nearly died and later spoke of visiting heaven and meeting a sister who had died as a miscarriage, a sister he had never been told about, lending veracity to his story. There are also numerous accounts from combat veterans, cardiac arrest survivors, and even children as young as 3 who articulate strikingly similar NDE motifs, often with less cultural influence. Children might simply say, I met God, or I was in a garden with Grandpa and Jesus, etc. In academic research, Dr. Bruce Grayson and Dr. Kenneth Ring have published collections of cases, including NDEs of the blind, who report visual experiences, and cross-cultural comparisons. One notable study by cardiologist Dr. Pim van Lommel in The Lancet in 2001 documented NDEs in cardiac arrest patients in Holland, finding that 18% had classic NDEs and that these patients often still recalled the experience years later with undiminished clarity. Overall, modern case studies reinforce the patterns already discussed: clear consciousness during periods of clinical death, consistent stages of experience, OBE, tunnel, beings, review, and profound positive after effects. They also illustrate how NDEs occur in various situations: illness, accidents, surgical complications, and to people of all walks of life, from children to doctors. The remarkable similarities across cases hint at some underlying common experience, while the differences in interpretation, shaped by personal and cultural lenses, and fascinating variety. Then there's NDEs across cultures and religions. Near-death experiences appear to have a human phenomenon not confined to any single culture or belief system. However, the way they are perceived and reported can be influenced by a person's cultural and religious background. Cross-cultural studies, such as those by Osis and Haraldson in the 1970s, and more recently by Pashrika and Stevenson in India, have revealed both universality and diversity in NDE accounts. So the common core versus cultural overlay. At their core, NDEs from around the world tend to share the presence of an out-of-body phase, movement to another realm, encounters with spiritual beings, and intense feelings of peace or fear. For example, whether the person is from the US or India, they often see some form of otherworldly guides and deceased relatives who communicate that the person must return to life. Both in America and India, many dying patients or NDEers describe seeing deceased loved ones waiting to take them to another world. And after such visions, they lose their fear and are willing to go. The loving reunion aspect seems common to all cultures. Life reviews, too, are reported in multiple cultures, though they might be interpreted through different moral frameworks. A Hindu might relate it to karma, a Christian might think of judgment. One Indian NDEer said he was shown all his good and bad deeds and was told it wasn't yet enough, implying he had to return to do more. Where differences emerge is often in the imagery and characters that appear. In predominantly Christian societies, NDEers may report meeting Jesus, angels with wings, or entering a heavenly throne room, where in Hindu or Buddhist contexts, one might meet Yama or Buddhist bodhisattvas, or see scenes resembling their spiritual descriptions of the afterlife. For instance, as touched on earlier, Indian NDEs frequently involve a scenario of mistaken identity in the afterlife bureaucracy. A classic pattern in India is the person dies, their soul is taken by Yamdoots, or messengers of Yama, the god of death, to a sort of office where a man with a book, record keeper, checks names and realizes a mistake. The person's time isn't up, or they grab the wrong individual with a similar name. The person is then promptly sent back to Earth, sometimes with an apology or simply an order for the escorts to return them. This template appears in numerous Indian cases. We saw it with Vasudev Pandy's story above. The Lord of Death scolds the minions for bringing the wrong Vasudev. Another Indian case, Durga Jadhav, had even more vivid cultural elements. Durga died of illness in 1940s India and found himself captured by 10 entities. When he tried to run, they cut off his legs. They took him to a place with tables and many people, an office-like scene where officials saw his name wasn't on the death list and said, "Why have you brought him? Take him back." Durga objected, "How can I go back? I have no feet." The beings then showed him a room filled with many legs, reattached the correct ones to him, and sent him back with advice not to bend his knees until they healed. Durga revived and indeed had unusual marks on his legs that corresponded to his story. His sister attested to him telling this immediately after awakening. This almost bureaucratic near-death scenario is far removed from a typical Western NDE. Yet the underlying structure of the worldly beings, a judgment of whether he should die or not, and then a return to life, is analogous. Another interesting difference, frequency of religious figures versus relatives. Osis and Haraldson's views or comparative study of deathbed visions found that Indian experiencers more often saw religious figures, such as Hindu deities, where Americans more often saw just family or friends. Similarly, Indians tended to be younger on average in their experiences because many occurred not in old age, but also in midlife accidents or illnesses in a culture with different mortality patterns. And researchers noted younger people were more likely to struggle or resist being taken. Indeed, Indian patients often argued or tried to escape in their NDEs like Durga did, perhaps reflecting a stronger reluctance to die when one has family duties and life left. Western accounts simply have this too, but many Western NDEs, often older heart patients, felt quite content to go. Indigenous and non-mainstream cultures. Studies and anecdotes from indigenous cultures also show unique flavors. For example, among some Native American tribes, NDEs might involve walking on a path and meeting spirit animals or ancestors specific to their traditions. Among Pacific Islanders, like the Kalai of Papua New Guinea, an anthropologist documented that people describe paradise in very material terms. They saw a land abundant with modern goods or a world of factories, planes, and highways, essentially an idealized Western lifestyle, which for them symbolized heaven. This is a reminder that the mind uses familiar symbols to frame the transcendent experience. The core feeling of bliss and being in the ultimate good place is universal, but one person's flowery meadow could be another's high-tech utopia. Another cross-cultural point is how afterlife beliefs shape interpretation. In cultures with reincarnation beliefs, Hindu, Buddhist, some African traditions, NDEs might be readily accepted as glimpses of the journey of the soul and not considered taboo. In contrast, in some strict religious communities, people might hesitate to share NDEs that don't align perfectly with doctrine. For instance, if a Christian expects a judgment by God, but instead only felt love and no judgment, they might be confused. Yet, interestingly, many NDEers across religions say that the experience itself transcended their prior beliefs. They often come back saying, I now respect all religions, but I'm not strictly any one religion. I feel God is about love beyond any single faith. The spiritual message of NDEs tends to be quite universalist. We are all one. Love is what matters, etc., which sometimes conflicts with the exclusivity of certain dogmas. This has led to both interfaith appreciation. Some see NDEs as proof of common truth across religions and challenges some religious individuals reinterpret their NDE in light of their theology. For example, a Christian NDEer might later say the being of light was Christ, even though he didn't say so explicitly. In summary, the common core of NDEs shines through in all cultures. The phenomena of consciousness separating, traveling to another realm, meeting non-physical entities, often being told to return, and being deeply changed by the encounter. The cultural overlay primarily affects who is seen, saints versus sages versus ancestors versus officials, and what environment is reported, lush garden, heavenly cloud city, bureaucratic office, etc. As Jody Long of NDERF aptly put it, one of the near-death experience truths is that each person integrates their NDE into their own pre-existing belief system. The NDE seems to present itself in forms the experiencer can accept or comprehend. This does not necessarily diminish its reality for them. Instead, many NDEers come to feel that different cultures are talking about the same thing in their own language. Cross-cultural NDE research thus not only validates that NDEs happen globally, but also enriches our understanding of the human imagination and expectation in coloring extraordinary spiritual experiences. All right, I'm going to take a break there. It's a lot. I'm more than halfway through, and we're basically at the halfway mark. So we have more time than I thought we would have. So let's see what people are saying. Okay. Roger Claiborne says AI has its place, but that place is not spying on our everyday life and recording it to be used against us. Laugh out loud. These data collection centers need to be outlawed. Hey, Logan, good to see you. Hey, Sirius, good to see you. And, good luck. I know you have to bounce, so good night and best to you and your family as well. Roger Claiborne is writing, tunnel is kind of like a womb, and end of the tunnel into light is like being reborn. Okay, so I'm gonna butcher your name. Jaikrith Hydra. The being I watched my daughter leave her thought cage behind when it was time. She punched me in the face with her last breath. I have often wondered if it was her sickness or something else. So yeah, sounds like psychedelics. Fear is your only God writes, life reviews are all bogus, negging, gaslighting, tweaked with peak love bomb technology to keep souls thinking they have lessons to learn. Again, fear is your only God continues. Bliss love bomb feels so great because life on this prison planet is so bad by stark comparison. Continues to say we are eternal, timeless, ageless, limitless spiritual beings, possibly being trillions of years old, but we need to learn lessons like be polite, don't cheat, help an old lady across the street. And actually rhymed. And then Jethkrith Hydra is saying, dude, this literally sounds like a DMT trip I had a long time ago. When it was almost over, I saw a girl reaching through the floor, but I couldn't go with her because of the barrier. Weird. Dante's Inferno is similar with a sleep instead of an almost death. Hey, Jalal writes, I read easily 90 hours of OBE NDE accounts that were compiled by a university study. It was fascinating. One man woke up lucid in the DNA spiral and described the creatures there and what they were up to. Oh yeah, James, yes, I am coming. I'm going to be a host at the Future Forecasting group a few times a month. So this channel is not going away. It's in addition to this channel. So you can all watch me over there. Yep, that's right. Future Forecasting group. Fred writes, I had one, but was too young to remember. So Jethkrith Hydra is writing, what spiritual beings have you guys met? So he's going to go first, or she. I don't know if that's a male or female name. Okay, I'll go first. I met what I call the infinity snake, not a snake eating itself, the infinite hydra of existence, larger than the multiverse, everything that is, was, and will be. Jalal writes, I met Adamus, described in the agnostic treatise as a Superman. He traveled on the intelligent man Adam at the enter of the atom, which included all the elements in this creative paradigm. Kind man. Okay, Jethro Hydra's writing. That's pretty cool. What was your experience like? Jalal writes, Adama spoke to me. The power of the elemental vehicle was overwhelming to me, and it threatened to rip all of the skin off my bones. He could see I was protecting myself. He was both kind and amused. So it was like words. What I experienced would be better described as a tapestry of visions, is what Jaikrith Rahydra is writing. Solite US Expat is writing, I woke up late and missed the first 30 minutes. Are you going to cover shared death? No, I'm actually not going to cover that one. I don't think so. I don't think I explicitly included anything like that. Okay, so Jalal says, no, it was personal, and he was there and speaking, but I was duck and covered. He inquired about well-being. Okay, so Late US Expat is saying they have a road-moving project on when the dollar is going to die. I wonder when that will be. Who knows? Okay. Let me get back to it. Just give me a moment. All right, now we're going to move on to deathbed visions and end of light experiences. Let's see. Bear with me here. All right. Oops. Three more came in. John Colthouse. Hey, good to see you, Joe Fox. All right, let me get started or restarted. All right, deathbed visions and end-of-life experiences. As people approach actual death as opposed to a near death that ends in recovery, there is a related phenomenon known as deathbed visions, or more broadly, end-of-life experiences, or ELEs. These are the visions, apparitions, and lucid experiences reported by people in their final hours or days of life, often witnessed or later recounted by healthcare workers and family at the bedside. While not identical to NDEs, since in death visions the person typically dies, or the person typically does not come back to tell the tale long term, especially except in those brief rallying moments before death. They share many thematic similarities with NDEs and can be considered part of the spectrum of transpersonal experiences around dying. This section details what deathbed visions are, how they relate to NDEs, and notable examples documented in research. So, what are deathbed visions? A deathbed vision, or DBV, is a subjective experience in which a dying person, usually while awake and lucid, though sometimes in and out of consciousness, perceives and often interacts with phenomena not visible to others present. These typically include seeing deceased loved ones, relatives or friends who have passed on, appearing in the room, or seeing spiritual entities, religious figures, angels, even beloved pets that died, who seem to come for the dying person. The dying individual might carry on a conversation with these unseen presences, smile at them, reach out to them, or express happiness at what they see. Sometimes they also describe glimpses of a beautiful place as if a door has opened to another realm, saying things like, "It's so beautiful, the music, the light," when there's nothing evident to the observers. Deathbed visions have been reported throughout history and across cultures, often treated as a sign that death is near. Indeed, hospice nurses and palliative doctors are well aware of DBVs. It's commonly said that a patient mentioning seeing dead relatives often precedes their death by a short time, and it usually comforts the patient greatly. Key features of deathbed visions include the person may suddenly become more alert or oriented, sometimes exhibiting terminal lucidity, a burst of clarity in a previously confused or unresponsive patient, and then report their vision. They might be staring fixedly at a corner or doorway where they can see someone, or they might speak directly to a presence. "Oh, mother, you came." They often show positive emotions, smiling, expressions of joy, reaching out with arms as if greeting visitors only they can perceive. One study noted that when such visions occur, any fear of death the patient has or had tends to evaporate, replaced by peace and even eagerness to go with the apparitions. These episodes can happen shortly before death, frequently in the hours or days before, though there are cases of them occurring a week or two in advance. Typically, they recur if the person doesn't die immediately. A patient might have conversations with invisible relatives periodically until they finally pass away. So, how common are DBVs? Various studies and surveys suggest they are relatively common in the dying. In hospice settings, it's perhaps more the rule than exception. One U.S. study cited by IANS found that 88% of hospice patients interviewed reported experiencing at least one end-of-life dream or vision of deceased loved ones. Another survey of death doulas in Canada similarly found 88% had observed a patient having a DBV in recent years. Earlier research by Osis and Haraldson involving hundreds in the 1960s, involving hundreds of doctors and nurses in the US and India, indicated that a significant fraction of conscious dying patients had visions, with estimates around 50% or more, though methodology varied. The consistency of reports from different countries was notable. Most commonly, the dying see relatives who come to take them away. Less frequently, they see religious figures, except in India, where religious figures were a bit more common, as noted earlier. Interestingly, DBVs reported by children similarly involve seeing grandparents or even playmates who died, often in a very natural and comforting way. "Grandma's here in my room. She's calling me to go with her." Deathbed visions differ from medical hallucinations like those from fever or medication in several ways. Caregivers note that true DBVs are clear, structured, and emotionally resonant, whereas hallucinations from oxygen deprivation or drugs tend to be fragmented, random, and distressing or nonsensical. For example, a delirious patient might see spiders on the wall, bizarre and scary, but a DBV patient calmly says, "My sister is sitting in the chair, smiling at me," something that makes sense in context and brings coherence and peace, not agitation. Moreover, DBVs often occur in patients who are not deliriant medications and have good oxygen levels, so not explainable by those factors. They also sometimes happen in groups. There are cases where multiple people in the room witness something, like a glow or a figure. These shared death experiences, SDEs, suggest. I guess there are shared death experiences in this. Sorry, Solite US expat. I didn't deliberately ask it to go here because I wasn't thinking about it, but captured it anyway. So SDEs suggest it's not always purely subjective, but SDEs are rarer. Typically, only the dying person sees the apparitions. Others just infer it from one-sided conversations or gestures. Now, on the relationship of deathbed visions to NDEs. Deathbed visions and NDEs share a thematic core. Both involve contact with an apparent afterlife realm or beings while still physically alive or near death. In both, seeing deceased relatives is extremely common, and both provide great comfort and loss of fear to the experiencer. One might consider a deathbed vision as an NDE that occurs at the threshold of permanent death. Indeed, DBVs can be seen as a part of the dying process where the boundary between worlds becomes permeable. However, there are differences. NDEs typically happen in sudden life-threatening events or clinical death situations, and the person comes back to full life to tell the story. With deathbed visions, the person usually does not return to baseline life. They usually die shortly after, minutes, hours, or days after. So deathbed vision accounts often come secondhand, reported by observers or via any remark the dying made before passing. Another difference is mobility. In an NDE, the person's consciousness often travels out of body and perhaps to other realms, heaven, etc. Whereas in a classic DBV, the dying person usually stays in their bed and perceives the other side coming to them. They might describe that the room changes, the wall opened into a beautiful garden, or that beings enter the room. Occasionally, though, dying patients do say they went somewhere. A common scenario is they'll say, "I was out of my body and I was almost to the light, but came back because you called me." And indeed, some hospice patients have a brief rally, then report an NDE-like experience. One could say NDEs are like round trips to the beyond, where deathbed visions are like one-way tickets, or at least a glimpse right before the departure. Yet some NDEs do involve being given the choice to continue to death or return. So in those cases, the person was at the same juncture that a dying person with a DBV faces. They just came back, whereas the other did not. From a phenomenological view, many NDEers who were resuscitated report that at the point they were revived, they were in the company of deceased relatives who were telling them it's not time, or physically blocking them from crossing a boundary. Deathbed vision reports often end with phrases from the dying like, "They are here for me, I'm going now," and then they peacefully pass. So it appears in both NDE and DBV contexts, deceased loved ones play the role of psychopomps, guides who escort souls either temporarily for NDEers who then get sent back, or completely for those who do die. Researchers like Carlos Osis and Erlendur Haraldsson explicitly compared NDEs and deathbed visions. They found that in both India and the United States, the majority of deathbed apparitions were of deceased family members coming to take the person, and importantly, they rarely named living persons in these visions. For instance, they wouldn't mistake a living person as being there, suggesting it's not mere confusion. A fascinating subset were peak Indarian cases, named after a famous case in the 19th century. That's when a dying person sees someone who everybody believes is alive and is surprised to see them. And later it's found that person had indeed died recently, unknown to the dying person. Sir William Barrett's book, Deathbed Visions in 1926, recorded such an example. A woman dying in childbirth saw her deceased father and also her sister Vida, who she did not know had died a few weeks prior. The family had kept that news from her due to her illness. Yet on her deathbed, she joyously said, "There is Vida. She's come to take me," much to the shock of her husband, who only later learned that Vida had indeed died. These evidential cases are rare but significant, as they hint that the visions aren't simply memory or wishful thinking. In an NDE, one might meet someone previously unknown to have died. There are cases of people who saw a dead relative they themselves never met or didn't know had died, similar in evidential value to Peak and Darien cases. Both phenomena suggest some kind of information transfer that is currently not explained by normal means, if taken at face value. Emotionally, both NDEs and DBVs overwhelmingly report feelings of peace, acceptance, and often euphoria. When in that otherworldly presence, a DBV tends to eliminate the fear of dying, and an NDE tends to eliminate the fear of death going forward as well, since the person knows there is something awaiting. So here are some notable examples of deathbed visions. Aside from the Barrett case above, the woman seeing her deceased sister Vida, many poignant examples exist. Katie, this is from the Osis and Haraldson study. A hospital case from the 1960s. A female cardiac patient in her 50s was depressed and afraid as she neared death. Suddenly, she sat up, eyes shining, and reached out happily, saying, "Oh, Katie, you came." She was seeing a deceased relative. The family later confirmed multiple deceased family women named Katie. And right after this joyful vision, she peacefully died. Then there's the man who saw his wife across a river. It's another case from the same research. A man dying in pain suddenly broke into a smile and stretched out his arms. When asked what he saw, he described that his wife, who had passed before him, was standing on the other side of a river, waiting for him. He became calm and died shortly after, apparently comforted by this vision of reunion. And there's children's deathbed vision. There's a touching anecdote of a young boy dying of leukemia who, in his final hour, stared up and said, "Mom, can you see them? The angels, they're so beautiful. And Grandpa is there too. He says he's come to take me play." The mother, who couldn't see anything, nevertheless felt a sense of peace from her child's demeanor. The boy died with a smile reaching upwards. Such accounts from pediatric hospice illustrate that DBEs or DBVs are not restricted to older adults. Children, too, report seeing beloved figures, often describing them in childlike terms. For instance, bright angels. And there's group vision, shared group vision. In rare instances, more than one person witnesses something. One historical case cited by physician William Barrett involved a dying woman who pointed to the corner of the room at a bright, beautiful figure. At that moment, the attending nurse, who originally saw nothing, suddenly felt a chill and saw fleetingly a glow in that corner. While anecdotal, such stories suggest a possible objective aspect to some visions. Then there's terminal lucidity with vision. A case of an advanced Alzheimer's patient who had been unresponsive and not recognizing family suddenly woke up shortly before death, spoke clearly to her daughter, and said, "Your father is here. Don't you see him? He's calling me." She named other long-gone relatives in the room and expressed joy. Within hours she passed. The family, while startled, took comfort in how lucid and happy she was at the end, convinced she truly saw those loved ones. This phenomena of terminal lucidity combined with DBV is reported enough to be a known pattern. The IANS fact sheet even references it in context of people doing things they were thought physically or mentally incapable of, like sitting up to greet someone not there in ordinary reality. Differences from hallucinations. It's important as well to note that DBVs are almost always meaningful. They tend to involve recognizable persons or transcendent imagery, not random monsters or incoherent scenes. They also make sense to the patient. For instance, seeing one's mother who died is inherently comforting and appropriate. As the IANS fact sheet points out, DBVs make perfect sense to dying people and usually to those who hear about it. whereas drug-induced hallucinations are often bizarre or nonsensical to everyone. DBVs typically occur in clear-minded moments. If a patient is heavily medicated or hypoxic, reducing those factors often results in fewer hallucinations. But DBVs have occurred in patients with no drugs or good oxygenation. In fact, hospice staff sometimes intentionally do not correct or suppress these visions, since they see them as beneficial. A patient who was restless or scared might become calm and serene after seeing a deceased spouse. The significance of deathbed visions. For researchers and clinicians, deathbed visions are significant because they provide another window into the question of consciousness at end of life and possibly in afterlife. They show that as death approaches, experiences very similar to NDEs can occur naturally. Both DBVs and NDEs strongly suggest a continuity of consciousness and the presence of some kind of welcoming process. In terms of care, understanding DBVs helps medical staff support patients instead of dismissing what a dying person says as confusion. Acknowledging that it's a common and often comforting phenomenon can improve end-of-life care. Many families take solace afterwards when they hear their loved ones saw angels or grandpa came for them. It lessens the grief to imagine a loving reunion. From a more analytical perspective, DBVs, especially the evidential ones, like seeing someone unknown to be dead, challenge a purely materialist view of mind. Similar to NDEs, they raise questions. How can a brain shutting down produce such clear, often veridical experiences? Why the consistency across cultures? Dead come to escort the dying? Is it spiritual reality manifesting or some deep psychological coping mechanism tapping into archetypes? These are debates that continue. One striking thought is how NDEs and DBVs might be part of one continuum. An NDE can be seen as the reversible segment of death, while DBVs are part of the irreversible crossing. Some researchers, like Peter Fenwick, a neuropsychiatrist who studied end-of-life phenomena, propose that as the brain dies, it releases consciousness, and in that process, people get these visions, which might be glimpses of an objective transition process. His wife, Elizabeth Fenwick, documented hundreds of hospice cases aligning with historical ones. In summary, deathbed visions are an essential part of any discussion on near-death or end-of-life experiences. They reinforce the experiential richness around dying that NDE highlight, but in a context that doesn't involve coming back to life. They are characterized by lucid visions of deceased persons or otherworldly scenes, bringing comfort and peace. They differ from NDEs mainly in outcome. The person dies in vantage. The dying often see others coming to get them rather than traveling themselves. Yet both phenomena paint a complementary picture, suggesting that death is not a sudden extinction, but a process, potentially filled with reunion and guided transition. Such accounts, collected over centuries, contribute greatly to humanity's understanding, or at least our narratives, of what dying feels like from the inside, beyond the purely biological observations. Okay, now let's move on to life between lives, inner life encounters and memories. Beyond the near-death experience and deathbed visions, another fascinating topic arises when discussing consciousness and continuity beyond physical life. Concept of the life between lives, also known as the intermission between incarnations. This idea posits that after death and before any possible rebirth, the soul or consciousness exists in a non-physical realm where it undergoes various experiences, such as reviews of the life that ended, communion with the other souls, learning and preparation for the next life. Reports of this inner life state come from several sources. Past life regression therapy, where subjects under hypnosis recall not just past lives, but the between life states. Certain spiritual and religious teachings, for example, Tibetan Buddhism's Bardo states, and occasionally near-death experiencers who claim they glimpsed or remembered aspects of a pre-birth plan or inner life during their NDE. In this section, we explore the key features of the life between lives as described by those sources, highlighting common themes like meeting guides, undergoing life selection, and being part of soul groups or councils. Between lives regression reports. This is Michael Newton's research. One of the most detailed troves of information on the inner life comes from hypnotherapist Dr. Michael Newton. Starting in the late 20th century, Newton conducted thousands of deep hypnosis sessions where clients were just ordinary people seeking therapy unexpectedly began to recall the spiritual realm between their past lives and current life. Other numerous cases, a strikingly consistent narrative emerged, which Newton documented in books like Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls. These accounts collectively paint a picture of a structured but non-physical existence for souls between incarnations. Key elements from Newton's regression research include transition and homecoming. After death, the soul often experiences a period of orientation and welcome. Subjects report that upon leaving their body, they are usually greeted by guides or angels and sometimes by soulmates or loved ones who have passed on. There's frequently a sensation of moving through a tunnel or portal into the spirit world, mirroring the NDE tunnel in some respects, followed by a feeling of arriving home. A common statement is that the spirit world is far more like one's true home than Earth did, or felt like. The newly returned soul is often enveloped by love and reassurance by these familiar beings. This initial stage is described as a healing reunion, a time when the soul is soothed after the often difficult journey of physical life. Spiritual realm with structure. The between lives environment has been described as a place of great beauty, often not physical in a human sense, but with areas or chambers that serve certain purposes. Many subjects mentioned a wonderful city or community of light, with spaces like libraries for life records, classrooms, gardens, and so forth. Importantly, they insist that while the spirit world is structured, it's not rigid or oppressive. It exists to facilitate soul's growth and understanding. Traditional authorities, we know it doesn't quite apply. Instead, wisdom and love permeate, and each soul is given personal attention. It transcends human hierarchy, one might say. Personal responsibility and learning are emphasized, but always in an atmosphere of compassion. And there's the life review and healing. Much like the life review during NDEs and the inner life accounts, souls undergo a thorough review of the life just completed. Newton's clients described entering a sort of reflection area where, often with the help of their guide, they review the events of their past life in detail. This can involve seeing holographic scenes or even reliving key moments to glean insights. The focus is on learning rather than judgment. Souls evaluate how well they met their goals, how they treated others, and what karma unresolved lessons remain. Many mention a council of elders, a group of highly evolved, wise beings who gently question the soul about their life and help them glean deeper wisdom. These elders are often described as radiant presences sitting in a chamber. People often visualize a domed hall or temple. During the council session, the soul feels profound love, but also a seriousness. It's a time of accounting for growth. The council doesn't punish, they guide, encourage, and if anything, the soul itself might feel remorse or pride as it judges its own performance. This closely parallels NDE life reviews, where the individual is often the ultimate judge of self. Newton's subjects said the Council of Elders helped them understand their karmic lessons and where to focus next. Often the presence of an even higher divine light is sensed in these meetings, what some call the presence of God or Source watching over the process. Soul groups and community. In the Between Lives accounts, souls do not exist in isolation. They belong to soul groups, clusters of souls who are at similar levels of evolution and who often reincarnate together in various roles to help each other learn. A typical soul group might have around 10 to 20 members who appear as distinct energies, often described in the regression as points of light or human-like forms made of light. These are one's closest spiritual family. In the inner life, souls in a group interact, share experiences from the lives they just lived, and plan future endeavors collectively. They may study together in what seem like classes or engage in group exercises to advance their understanding. There's a sense of camaraderie and deep unconditional love among them. When a soul returns from Earth, group members welcome them like a returning hero, eager to hear what they learned, since all learn vicariously through each member's adventures. This paints a picture that our relationships on Earth often continue in spirit. People who feel like kindred spirits here may literally be so, part of one soul group. The concept of soulmates also arises. Often one or two souls in that group are extremely close to you and may play multiple significant roles in your various lifetimes. For instance, in one life, your soulmate might be your spouse, and another, your sibling or best friend. These bonds persist across lives. And then there's the concept of learning and growth. The inner life is seen fundamentally as a realm of learning and recuperation. Souls can access vast knowledge. Newton's subjects spoke of visiting libraries or archives like the Akashic Records to study not only their past lives, but general truths of the universe. There are also descriptions of energy healing. Newly returned souls might go to something described as a restoration area or place of healing, where spiritual energy baths or beams help wash away the psychic residue of the life's trauma. One case described being placed in a kind of spiritual hospital after a particularly difficult life, such as one ending in suicide or heavy grief, where guides ministered healing energy until the soul was rejuvenated. Souls also refine skills or interests. So, for instance, artistic souls might engage in creative spiritual expressions. Intellectual souls might dive into cosmic research, etc., all as part of expanding their consciousness. Crucially, the ethos is that earthly lives are like schooling, and the inner life is a chance to assess the plan and plan the next semester. Mistakes are seen as lessons, not damnation, which resonates with how many NDEers feel. No condemnation in their life review, only a push to learn and do better. Then there's the planning of next life. After sufficient rest and study, souls prepare for a new incarnation. This involves carefully plotting the circumstances that will best allow them to progress in whatever lessons or themes they need. Newton's clients gave remarkably detailed accounts of life selection. They would be presented with several possible life scenarios, including potential bodies, families, eras, and they would discuss with their guides and counsel which choice aligns with their growth goals. They consider karma, unfinished business with other souls. For example, I hurt you in a past life. Maybe I will be the one hurt by you in the next to balance and understand. And mutual agreements with other souls in their group who may take roles in that life. There's an emphasis on free will. Even though there's a plan once in life, one still chooses how to play the hand, so to speak. The planning can include deciding on certain key events or wake-up calls to be inserted. Some NDEers later feel their near-death event was pre-planned as a wake-up call. Another common element is that souls often have to accept certain limitations or challenges in their next life to spur growth. For example, choosing a body with a disability to develop inner qualities, or being born into a difficult environment to overcome it. None of this is seen as punishment. It's more like, what set of conditions will best teach me X? And sometimes the tougher lives teach more. The Council of Elders usually gives final approval, ensuring the soul isn't overestimating or underestimating its ability. Then there's reincarnation and departure. Once the plan is set, the soul starts the process of incarnating. Subjects described a bittersweet farewell in the spirit world, excitement for the new adventures mixed with knowing they will miss their conscious companionship with their group and guides. Often a guide or a soulmate might actually accompany them to a point. Some say a soulmate might incarnate as a twin or a close sibling. The entry into the physical world is usually at or before birth. Interestingly, a few described hovering around the chosen parents during pregnancy and easing into the fetus sometime in late pregnancy or at birth. Then the veil of forgetfulness falls, and they become the baby with no memory, except rare hints of all that planning. Only through regression or NDE or other means might they recall it later. Newton's collective data arguably presents a coherent narrative of the afterlife that complements what many NDEers report. In fact, there's a lot of overlap. NDEers who went far enough in their experience often mention some similar things. Meeting a council, being told about their mission on Earth, seeing a sort of city of light, meeting a deity figure, radiating love, etc. Some NDEers, like Betty Eady, author of Embraced by the Light, claimed that during her NDE, she was shown how she had agreed to certain challenges in life and that nothing was by accident, echoing the life plan idea. Another NDEer, Mellon Thomas Benedict, said he was taken to a library of knowledge and glimpsed a kind of staging area where souls were prepared to reincarnate, which is again similar to regression accounts. The near-death visions of unborn children, studied by Craig Lundahl, documented NDEs where experiencers met souls of children waiting to be born into their families. One man saw his future son in the spirit realm. Another girl playing in a heavenly meadow met two little boys who later came through as her mother's future sons. These incidents suggest that even NDEs can occasionally tap into that inner life where unborn souls reside before coming to Earth. Then we have spiritual and traditional perspectives on the inner life. Long before modern regression or NDE studies, various spiritual traditions envisioned a life between lives. Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, has the detailed concept of the bardo, intermediate states after death, described in the Bardo Thodal, which is the Tibetan Book of the Dead. According to this text, after death, the consciousness spends up to 49 days in a series of bardos where it experiences visionary phenomenon, initially a clear light, which, if recognized, leads to enlightenment, then encounters with peaceful and wrathful deities, which are projections of one's mind, and eventually, if liberation isn't attained, a bardo of becoming where the soul is drawn to a new womb for rebirth. The Tibetan Book of the Dead even gives guidance to the dying person to navigate these states, effectively a manual for the inner life. It describes how the consciousness should not be afraid of the visions, how to resist being seduced or terrified by hallucinations, and how to choose the best rebirth if one must. This is a highly sophisticated ancient model of the inner life, aligning in parts with what modern subjects say, encountering beings of light and undergoing an interim period before rebirth. The emphasis on the possibility of enlightenment in the after-death state is unique to Buddhist view, whereas regression accounts lean more to the reincarnation cycle continuing until souls improve gradually. Hindu philosophy also includes an interim after death. The concept of Pitarloka, realm of ancestors, or various heavens and hells, Svarga, Naraka, where souls go according to karma, but are not necessarily permanent. They eventually return to Earth. The Garuda Purana, or Purana, a Hindu text, describes the soul's journey after death through different realms and eventually reincarnation based on karma. It's couched in mythic imagery, but the idea of an interim is present. Many Hindus and Sikhs who have had NDE-like experiences indeed interpreted them via Yama's court, the judgment hall, which can be seen as analogous to Newton's council, albeit more fearsome in lore. Interestingly, we saw how Indian NDEs often feature being told it's not time and being sent back. This aligns with the belief that until it's the destined time, one returns. Western esoteric traditions like Theosophy, some early 20th century spiritualist writings, explicitly discuss life between lives. Theosophy speaks of Devachan, a blissful interlude between incarnations where the soul processes the last life's experiences, sort of a self-created heaven to assimilate lessons. After Devachan, the soul goes to Kamaloka, the astral plane, for eventual rebirth. This parallels a lot of what regression uncovered: blissful resting place followed by preparation to return. And then there's modern spiritualism in the 19th and 20th centuries. From mediumistic accounts, often described the afterlife as a series of spheres where souls live, learn, and progress. Many mediums reported that souls communicated the existence of schools, jobs, even cities in the beyond. Not unlike what Newton's patient said. The notion of a summerland, a term used by some spiritualists to denote a beautiful realm where spirits dwell between earthly lives, resonates strongly with the idyllic landscapes NDEers and regressions describe. In summary, the concept of an inner life is far from new. It appears in many belief systems, and what's remarkable is how much concordance there is. Modern regression and NDE accounts often validate these older teachings in fresh, secular language. It is as if multiple vantage points, ancient scripture, mediumistic messages, contemporary hypnosis, and NDEs are all pointing to a stage of existence where souls continue their journey after death, engage in meaningful activities, review, reunion planning, and then re-enter life, forming an ongoing cycle of growth. Okay, and then there's near-death accounts involving inner life memories. While NDEs usually concern the immediate death-related realm, like a preview of the afterlife one would go to if one died then, there are instances where NDEs report glimpses specifically of a pre-birth context or memories of having chosen their life. For instance, a documented NDE from LDS, or Mormon literature, tells of a man named Ned who, during an NDE, was shown a room full of souls, including children, and he realized some were the spirits of his future children waiting to be born to him. This aligns with accounts from regression that say unborn souls often wait and watch over their future families. Another NDE, or the aforementioned Betty Eady, claims in her experience she recalled that she herself had agreed to come to Earth at that time, and even saw glimpses of a council where such plans were made. She also felt she recognized some people in this life as part of her spiritual family from before birth. There are also cases of young children with spontaneous past life memories who mention the intermission state. Researcher Ian Stevenson published cases where children, aside from claiming past life recollections, described how after dying they waited until the right parents came along, or how they were brought by a man in white to their new mother. This is effectively an inner life memory from a child's mouth. One boy in Sri Lanka said he was taken to a place where with many babies and then chosen by his current mother, a narrative mixing a bit of cultural motif with possibly genuine recall. An interesting angle is therapeutic benefits. People who undergo life between lives regression often lose fear of death, similar to NDEers, and gain perspective on their life challenges, seeing them as purposeful. NDEers who encounter the inner life, even if briefly, often come back with a clear sense of purpose. They might say, I now know my life has a mission, or I promised to do something, so I better get to it. For instance, some NDEers who had been suicidal say that during their NDE, they realized they had signed up for certain lessons and that ending life early only delays or wastes them. As a result, they return committed to living fully despite hardships. All right, so let's put it all together. When we compile the narratives from NDEs, deathbed visions, and inner life regressions, we get a rather grand picture, a continuation of consciousness that traverses death. In this picture, death is not an abrupt end, but a transition into another chapter, one in which the soul reviews and recuperates, stays connected with its loved ones in spiritual form, and then eventually chooses to embark on a new life adventure. The inner life concept emphasizes reincarnation as a growth process, adding an extra dimension to what NDEs show. NDEs often stop at the entrance to heaven or at the decision point to return, whereas the inner life material carries the story onward. What if you didn't come back, but spent time in that realm and then came again? These two sources, NDE and inner life regression, essentially corroborate each other on many points. The existence of a loving light, spirit guides, reunions with souls, life reviews, and purposeful rebirth. Of course, it must be acknowledged that both NDE and regression reports are subjective and not without skeptics, but from the perspective of the experiencers and many who study them, the consistency and depth of these accounts provide powerful affirmation of a meaningful spiritual reality underpinning physical life. They portray the universe as a kind of spiritual school where our lives are akin to classes we attend. Death is simply graduation to the next phase, and the intermissions are where we look at the report card and decide on new courses. The emphasis is invariably on love, knowledge, and moral growth as the currency of value, a theme that is striking across NDEs and regressions alike. In conclusion, exploring life between lives through these accounts encourages a holistic understanding of the journey of consciousness, from pre-birth intention to earthly experience to post-death review and around again. It adds richness to the NDE narratives by suggesting that the being of light and guides have been with us before we were born and will remain after, that the dead relatives welcoming an NDEer had once welcomed them into life as well, and that each life has threads connecting backwards and forwards in a tapestry of many lifetimes. Whether one takes it literally or symbolically, it is undeniably a comforting and ennobling vision. It implies that our struggles have purpose, our relationships are eternal, and death is not to be feared, but seen as going home and maybe coming back for recess in the grand adventure of the soul. So, in conclusion, from the accounts and analyses above, we can see that near-death experiences, deathbed visions, and reports of a life between lives collectively offers an experiential map of what dying and beyond might feel like. Near-death experiences provide a dramatic first-hand narrative of crossing the threshold of death, the sensation of leaving the body, traveling through darkness into light, meeting transcendent love and familiar souls, we're living one's life with newfound understanding and often being sent back with a renewed appreciation for life. These experiences, reported with striking consistency by people across cultures and times, suggest that consciousness can perceive realms of existence that are not accessible during ordinary life. The common stages of NDEs, from out-of-body floating to tunnel, to encounters with a being of light, or deceased loved ones, to a panoramic life review, emphasize themes of peace, connectedness, and learning. People return from NDEs profoundly transformed. They nearly always describe losing their fear of death, gaining a sense of purpose, and realizing the paramount importance of love and knowledge. In the case studies we examined, we saw how individual narratives flesh out these general stages with concrete, compelling detail. Historical cases like Plato's or Bade's dry thumb show that humans have been reporting these motifs long before modern medicine, suggesting the NDE is not a product of contemporary culture, but a part of human experience. Modern cases like Pam Reynolds and Maria illustrate that NDEs can include verifiable perceptions, challenging our understanding of mind and brain. Cross-cultural comparisons broaden our perspective. Whether an American meets Jesus or an Indian meets Yamaraj's messengers, the underlying process is analogous. The person's psyche uses familiar symbols to navigate the journey out of life. This diversity in similarity enriches the narrative of NDEs, underscoring a universal experience colored by personal context. Deathbed visions closely parallel NDEs, but in life's final chapter. They reaffirm that as people truly approach death, they often see what NDEers saw, loving presences of those who've gone before, sometimes glorious sights of another world, and they feel great peace and readiness to depart. Deathbed visions bridge the gap between NDEs, where one returns, and actual death, where one doesn't return to tell us. They show that even when not revived, the transition of dying can be gentle, even joyous, a reunion rather than a terror. Examples of DBVs, like the dying mother recognizing a predeceased sister no one told her about, also provide some of the most intriguing hints that these experiences might reflect more than hallucinations. DBVs and NDEs together form a continuum. NDEers often say, "I was sent back because it wasn't my time," while DBV patients conversely often announce, "They're here to get me, I have to go." Both indicate a timing and orchestration beyond the individual's will, which many interpret as spiritual in nature. Finally, the exploration of the life between lives adds a broad context that frames NDEs and DBVs as part of a larger journey of the soul. The reports from regression and spiritual traditions propose that our consciousness existed before this life and will continue after, engaging in cycles of embodiment for growth. They depict a purposeful universe where we plan our lives, meet challenges for the sake of learning, and are guided all along by wiser beings. Near-death experiencers sometimes glimpse this bigger picture, whether in meeting a council of elders or recalling that they had agreed to their life plan. Such insights can powerfully reframe one's understanding of suffering and destiny. Life's difficulties may be seen not as meaningless evils, but as tasks or lessons we choose with a higher wisdom for our soul's evolution. Of course, from a skeptical viewpoint, one could argue these accounts are constructions of the brain under stress or fantasies of the subconscious. The scientific debate remains unresolved because inherently these are not experiential and often subjective phenomena that do not lend themselves easily to laboratory proof. Nonetheless, the sheer volume of consistent accounts from cardiac arrest survivors to dying patients, from children to people of all cultures, and the tangible changes These experiences bring about in individuals' lives even dramatic increases in altruism, loss of fear of death, etc., cannot be lightly dismissed. Even some scientists are open to studying consciousness in new ways as a result. At the very least, these narratives have immense value for human beings, regardless of one's belief. They provide comfort about death, they encourage love and ethical living, and they diminish the sting of loss by suggesting continued existence. In summary, through clear and structural stages, vivid case narratives, cross cultural perspectives, and deep exploration of spiritual dimensions, we have surveyed the landscape of near death and related experiences. We found that experientially, people consistently report transcendent unity, supreme love, and continuity of self beyond physical demise. Such experiences have been happening long before our scientific era and will continue to quietly affirming that the final human experience might not be darkness or oblivion, but light and connection. Whether interpreted spiritually or psychologically, NDEs and their kindred phenomena challenge us to think what it means to be alive and to die. They suggest that dying is not the end of awareness, but rather a transformative passage, perhaps a homecoming to a larger reality in which, as countless NDEers attest, love is the highest truth. Ultimately, the experiential accounts of near death and beyond remind us to live our current lives more fully and kindly. As many NDE survivors put it, having touched what felt like the essence of existence, they return with a simple but profound message: live with love, fear not death, and know that we're all part of something eternal. All right, folks, that's all she wrote. I told you it was enough. I didn't honestly think I was going to get through it. There was so much of it. So, all right, let's just go through some of the comments. Ooh, that was brutal. Brutal getting through all that. All right, I don't really need to. Joe Fox is writing, I sure hope deathbed visions are real. I believe in them as I believe in God. Hey, Miss Tammy, good to see you. Miss Tammy says, I wrote about beings once. Dusty writes, individual soul development may not parallel the environment entered. Some may be overqualified and others underqualified. Yep, fair point. Miss Tammy writes, wouldn't it be like that anyway with ultimate mixed bag? It makes sense, but then again, it doesn't. Learn all these lessons to forget them. I don't know. Isn't that counterproductive? Learn things, but you can't remember any of it. Well, you remember it over across the veil. So I think having the limitation is what makes the lessons hard. So Dusty writes, or learns things when others don't, and upon return can't progress. Dusty again writes, this new understanding of this black sun Saturnian logic is that which is causing many to not remember, hence perpetual soul churn and slavery. Jai Krathendrahydra is writing, you learn things and take them back to the universe. There's no need to remember them here. They don't belong to this collection of atoms. Indeed. Dusty writes, inspiring. So Soulite US Expeditors, are you seeing that ChatGPT is doing a much better job than ChatGPT, right? In this case, it did. Soulite US Expeditors did a good job. In terms of like generating like images for thumbnails, it's far, far worse than ChatGPT. Like it just doesn't, it hallucinates way too much. So, and it doesn't follow instructions. It's way worse from an image creation thing. Dana Scully. Yeah, you're welcome. A good little X-Files reference. So, all right, we got like 5 minutes left. So, I kind of managed it pretty tight this time, which is great. So, if anybody has any questions, just let me know. But I will probably end promptly in 5 minutes because that was brutal going through. Let me see how this is going. All right. Oh man. Anybody have any other questions? Almost at the top of the hour. So, what do folks think of all this stuff? Does that sound pretty accurate to what you've heard about near death experiences, deathbed visions, or life between lives? Okay, so Solite US Expat is saying, I guess you now have access to all of future forecasting shows. Are you going to watch their projects when time allows? Perhaps do a show around some of the more interesting. Well, I definitely do have access to all their stuff, and I have watched some of it. But it's hard to search through, which is why they did like a rebrand and kind of established a new site, so it'd be easier to search and find the stuff you're looking for. Well, thank you, Dana Scully. It's very, very strange for me to be talking to a character of the X Files, but Dana Scully of the X Files writes, I thought it was enlightening and resonates with my beliefs. Yeah, I've heard all those things kind of individually, but it was good to see it kind of compressed into one holistic narrative. So I thought that was helpful. Indeed. What else? Well, I think recent episodes on the my podcast have finally started showing some signs of life again. So YouTube's still deleting subscribers, but it's July did not do well, but this month did much better. So, or is doing much better. The month isn't over yet, but it's definitely growing like it hasn't grown for a long while. It's almost as if there was this. I had to break through the 15,000 subscriber barrier, and then it just started growing again. So, oh, let's see. Yeah, I hope so too. So Fred writes, I hope you get more views after hosting the future forecasting group. Yeah, I think so too. And it's there's a lot of interesting things that we do there. It's not just we also yeah, well I won't get into it because I'm not sure what I can share and what I can't. So Solite US Expat is saying any exciting guests coming up. By the way, if you do 5 to 7 YouTube shorts, it keeps up with the algorithm. You might be able to get more subscribe. Yeah, I did a whole experiment with shorts, and it's an utter waste of time. Like I have a whole process for it, and like if I get over 1,000 for like a typical video for shorts, I'll be lucky if I get 100. I mean, over time it builds, but it's a huge waste of time. And so people need to want this short of an algorithm. Yeah, yeah. I'm not sure what that means, but all right. I have like room for like one more question, something like that, and then I think I I'll just get that out there. All right. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully, you have a great rest of your weekend and very productive and happy next week. So, God bless. And thank you. Yeah, Dana Scully writes. Unfortunately, most people have an attention span of 14 seconds now. I think it's shorter than that, actually. Anyway, good night. God bless, and have a phenomenal week, everybody. Thank you.